Standing ground. What happens when the quiet kid finally has enough? The fluorescent lights of Lincoln Valley High cast harsh shadows across the lunch tables, creating a battlefield of social hierarchies where every seat told a story. At the center of this ecosystem sat Tyler Cross, his varsity jacket pristine and his smile sharp enough to cut glass. He ruled this domain with the casual cruelty that only comes from never facing real consequences. But today, his attention fixed on something different, someone different. In the furthest corner, near the emergency exit where most students feared to tread, sat Elena Rodriguez. She'd been here 3 weeks now, transferred from some fancy private academy after her family's world collapsed. Her father's investment firm had made headlines for all the wrong reasons, leaving their family financially ruined and socially exiled. Elena kept her head down, focused on the worn paperback in her hands, while mechanically eating a homemade sandwich. Everything about her screamed, "Leave me alone," from her deliberately plain clothes to the way she positioned herself with her back to the wall. But Tyler had built his reputation on ignoring such signals. "Look at little Miss Invisible over there," he murmured to his companions, Jake Morrison and Alex Rivers. 3 weeks and she hasn't spoken to a soul. Acts like she's too good for the rest of us. Jake grinned, already anticipating the entertainment. At 17, he'd learned that riding Tyler's coattails opened doors that his own mediocre charisma never could. Probably waiting for Daddy to buy her way into the popular crowd. Too bad Daddy's broke now. Alex pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the camera. This could go viral. Rich girl gets reality check about public school life. He was only 16, but talked like someone who'd monetized every moment of human misery he'd ever witnessed. The trio rose in unison, Tyler leading with predatory grace. Other students noticed the movement, conversations shifting as heads turned to watch. In Lincoln Valley's social ecosystem, Tyler's attention was currency, and everyone wanted to see how the market would move. Elena sensed the change before she saw it. The ambient noise didn't stop exactly, but it focused, became more intentional. She didn't look up immediately, but her shoulders tensed with barely perceptible awareness. When she finally raised her eyes, 3 figures blocked the natural light from the windows. "Hey there," Tyler said, his voice pitched just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "You're the transfer student, right?" Elena. He didn't wait for confirmation. "I'm Tyler Cross, student body president, quarterback, all that good stuff." His smile revealed teeth that probably cost more than her family's monthly groceries. "Figured you might be lonely over here by yourself." The offer wasn't really an offer. Jake had already claimed the seat across from her, while Alex slid in beside him, phone discreetly positioned. Tyler remained standing, using height advantage for maximum psychological impact. "That's thoughtful," Elena replied carefully, marking her place with a finger. "But I actually prefer quiet while I read." Her voice carried traces of private education, vowels slightly more refined than typical Lincoln Valley pronunciation. Not pretentious exactly, but noticeable. "Oh, you prefer quiet," Tyler repeated, letting the words hang. "That's interesting. Most people who come here want to fit in, make friends, join the community." He finally sat, claiming the chair to her right, close enough that she had to lean away. "But you've been here 3 weeks without talking to anyone. Some people might think that's antisocial." Elena's laptop sat beside her lunch, screensaver cycling through images. For just a moment, a photo flashed across the display, teenagers in white martial arts uniforms, medals around their necks, standing before a tournament banner. The image passed quickly, but Tyler caught a glimpse. "What was that?" he asked, reaching toward the trackpad. "Some kind of sports team." Elena's hand moved with startling speed, closing the laptop before his fingers made contact. "Just random pictures," she said, but there was something new in her voice, a note of caution. screensaver pulls from old folders. Jake leaned forward, intrigued by her reaction. You do sports? Should try out for something here. Good way to make friends. His tone suggested helpfulness while carrying undertones of mockery. I'm more of an individual activity person, Eleanor replied, unconsciously touching a small bracelet on her wrist. The charm was barely visible, but revealed an engraved symbol that looked distinctly martial. Team sports aren't really my thing. Alex's camera captured everything. The defensive body language, the way her eyes darted toward the exit when she thought nobody was looking. Individual activities, he echoed. Like what? Yoga, meditation, knitting? Each suggestion carried increasing sarcasm. The conversation drew attention from surrounding tables. Lincoln Valley students had learned to recognize the signs of pending social drama, and phones started appearing with practiced subtlety. This wasn't unusual entertainment exactly, but Tyler's involvement guaranteed spectacle. You know what I think? Tyler said, leaning back with studied casualness. I think you're trying too hard to be mysterious. The whole lone wolf thing might have worked at your fancy private school, but here we believe in community participation. He gestured broadly at the cafeteria around them. This is your community now. These are your people. Elena's grip on her book tightened slightly, knuckles showing white beneath fair skin. I appreciate the welcome, but I'm honestly fine eating alone. It's nothing personal. Not personal, Tyler repeated thoughtfully. But see, that's where you're wrong. Everything here is personal. When you sit alone, you're making a statement. When you don't join activities, don't make friends, don't participate in school spirit. He trailed off, letting implications settle. People start wondering if maybe you think you're better than them. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Around them, conversations had stopped entirely, replaced by focused attention usually reserved for car accidents. Elena found herself at the center of a social spotlight she'd never wanted, surrounded by faces eager for drama they wouldn't have to experience personally. I don't think I'm better than anyone, she said quietly. I just want to finish lunch and get to class. Of course you don't, Jake chimed in with false sympathy. But intentions don't always match impact, you know. Like right now. You're sitting here reading instead of getting to know your classmates. That sends a message whether you mean it or not. Elena closed her book completely, setting it carefully on the table. The movement was controlled, deliberate, but something underneath made Alex adjust his phone angle. What message do you think it sends? That you're stuck up, Alex answered immediately. That Daddy's money made you special, and now you're slumming it with the rest of us. The words hit like physical blows, designed to provoke reaction. Elena's jaw tightened, but her voice remained level. My father's situation is public record, if you're interested in facts rather than assumptions. Oh, we know about Daddy's scandal, Tyler said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through what appeared to be a news article. Investment advisor embezzles client funds. Families lose life savings. Social exile follows financial ruin. He looked up with mock concern. That must have been rough. Going from country club princess to this. The cruelty was casual, conversational, which somehow made it worse than overt aggression. Around them, students leaned forward, phones capturing every word for later distribution. This was content creation in real time, teenage social dynamics weaponized for entertainment. Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her bracelet, fingers finding the small charm. For just a moment her breathing changed, became more controlled. That's enough, she said quietly. Enough? Tyler laughed, the sound carrying across the now silent cafeteria. We're just getting to know each other. Building community connections. He reached out suddenly, fingertips brushing her laptop. Maybe you could show us those sports pictures. Help us understand what individual activities you're into. Before she could react, his hand knocked over her water bottle, sending liquid cascading across the table toward her book and laptop. Eleanor moved instinctively, hands protecting her belongings with speed that suggested practiced reflexes, but damage spread quickly across notebook pages and threatened electronic equipment. "Oh, wow. Sorry about that," Tyler said, his apology carrying no sincerity. "I'm so clumsy sometimes. Here, let me help clean that up." He reached for her napkins, movements slow and deliberate, clearly enjoying the chaos he'd created. "Don't," Elena said sharply, pulling her things away from spreading water. "Just don't." She began gathering belongings, stacking wet papers and assessing laptop damage. The book's pages were waterlogged, months of careful notes possibly ruined. "Hey, don't be like that," Jake said with injured innocence. "Accidents happen. Tyler's just trying to be friendly. Maybe if you weren't so defensive all the time, these things wouldn't keep happening." The implication was clear. This was her fault, her antisocial behavior inviting social correction. It was masterclass psychological manipulation, turning aggression into victimhood, making the target responsible for their own harassment. Alex's camera captured everything from her frantic attempts to save possessions to the growing wet spot on her jeans where water had dripped. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he narrated quietly. "Zero social awareness. Can't even accept help when it's offered." Elena stood abruptly, laptop clutched against her chest, water still dripping from damaged belongings. "I need to go." But Tyler rose simultaneously, larger frame blocking her path to the exit. "Come on, don't be dramatic," he said, hands raised in mock surrender. "It was just water. I said I was sorry. Maybe I could buy you lunch tomorrow to make up for it. Show you some better spots around town." The offer was loaded with subtext everyone understood. This wasn't about making amends. It was about establishing dominance, proving her resistance was futile. In Tyler's world, everyone eventually submitted to his particular brand of charm, and refusal only made eventual capitulation more satisfying. "I don't need you to buy me anything," Eleanor replied, trying to step around him, but Jake had moved to her left, while Alex covered her right, creating a human barrier that appeared casual, but effectively trapped her in place. "See, that's exactly the attitude we're talking about," Tyler said, voice carrying across the cafeteria. "Someone offers friendship, tries to welcome you to the community, and you throw it back in their face. How is that supposed to make people feel?" The psychological pressure was immense. Every eye in the cafeteria focused on her response, waiting to see if she'd submit to social expectations or continue her antisocial resistance. Teachers patrolled the outer edges, but they were far enough away that this conversation appeared to be normal teenage interaction rather than systematic harassment. Elena's breathing had become very controlled now, each inhalation measured and deliberate. Her free hand hung at her side, fingers slightly curled, though most observers would attribute the tension to social anxiety rather than anything more significant. "Please move," she said quietly. "Please move," Tyler repeated, mimicking her tone with exaggerated politeness. "Magic word and everything, but see, here's the thing about community." He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Sometimes we all have to do things we don't want to do, for the greater good." That's when Ms. Walsh walked by, heels clicking against linoleum as she made daily rounds through the cafeteria. She was young for a teacher, probably early 30s, with optimistic energy that suggested she still believed in making a difference. When she spotted the group around Elena, her face brightened with genuine pleasure. "Tyler," she called out warmly, "are you introducing our new student around?" "That's wonderful. I was hoping someone would help Elena feel welcome." She approached with confident stride, seeing exactly what she expected. Popular students reaching out to someone new. Elena turned toward the teacher with obvious relief, seeing an adult who might provide escape from this increasingly uncomfortable situation. Ms. Walsh, I was just... Oh, it's so nice to see you making friends, Ms. Walsh interrupted, smile warm and encouraging. Tyler is one of our finest students, student body president, quarterback, and his family has been incredibly generous to our athletic programs. She placed a proud hand on Tyler's shoulder. If anyone can help you adjust to Lincoln Valley culture, it's him. The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. The one adult within range not only failed to recognize the situation, but actively endorsed it, legitimizing Tyler's behavior with institutional authority. Around them, students watched with knowing smiles, understanding that this moment represented complete social isolation. "That's very kind," Elena managed, voice strained with the effort of maintaining composure. "Isn't it?" Ms. Walsh beamed. "Tyler was just telling me yesterday how important it is to help new students find their place. Community building is so crucial at this age." She glanced at her watch. "Well, I'll let you kids get back to socializing. Elena, I hope you'll consider joining some extracurricular activities. Nothing like school spirit to help you feel at home." She walked away with satisfied air, leaving Elena trapped with three predators who now had institutional blessing for their behavior. "See?" Tyler said quietly, voice barely audible to surrounding tables. "Ms. Walsh gets it. Community integration isn't optional here. It's expected." His smile never wavered, but his eyes had gone cold. "Some people learn that the easy way. Others..." He shrugged, letting implications fill silence. The cafeteria had returned to normal conversation levels, but phones remained discreetly positioned, capturing everything. This was how reputation destruction began in the digital age, not with grand gestures, but with small moments of public humiliation that accumulated over time. Elena looked around the room, seeing faces that ranged from entertained to sympathetic, but none offering actual support. Even students who might privately disapprove understood the social mathematics. Crossing Tyler meant becoming his next target, and self-preservation trumped solidarity every time. Her grip on the laptop tightened, knuckles showing white. When she spoke, her voice carried a quality that made Alex unconsciously adjust his phone position. "I just want to finish my lunch in peace," she said, each word carefully controlled. "Is that really too much to ask?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, though she clearly intended it as a plea. But Tyler heard challenge, and his response transformed the entire dynamic. "Too much to ask?" he repeated slowly, voice dropping to a register that carried despite its quietness. "Let me tell you what's too much to ask, Elena. Coming into our school, sitting alone like you're too good for the rest of us, brushing off every friendly gesture, and then acting like we're the problem when you clearly can't handle basic social interaction." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the calculation behind his practiced smile. "What's too much to ask is expecting special treatment because your family had financial troubles. What's too much to ask is thinking you can hide in corners until graduation without participating in the community that's trying to accept you." Jake and Alex closed ranks, their positioning now clearly deliberate. Students at nearby tables leaned forward, sensing this social experiment had reached a critical juncture where something significant was about to happen. Elena's breathing remained controlled, but something fundamental had shifted in her posture. The defensive hunch of her shoulders had straightened into something more centered, more balanced. Her free hand no longer hung loosely, but rested with deliberate placement, fingers slightly curled in a way that suggested readiness rather than anxiety. "You're right," she said quietly. For a moment, Tyler thought he'd won. "I should participate more in community activities." Her grip on the laptop shifted, freeing up her dominant hand while maintaining protection of her belongings. "Starting right now." The words carried undertones that made Alex's camera hand tremble slightly, though he didn't understand why. Around them, cafeteria noise seemed to fade, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Tyler reached out to grab her wrist, smile widening with anticipated victory. "Now you're being reasonable. Let's sit back down and—" That's when everything changed. The moment Tyler's fingers closed around Elena's wrist, muscle memory took over. 6 years of martial arts training compressed into 3 seconds of fluid motion that most observers would later struggle to describe accurately. Her left hand pivoted, thumb pointing down as she rotated her wrist in a classic escape technique, breaking his grip with leverage rather than strength. The movement flowed seamlessly into a step back that created distance while maintaining balance. Jake moved in from her left, reaching for her shoulder in what appeared to be a restraining gesture but carried clear intimidation. Elena's response was immediate and precise. A defensive elbow block that connected with his forearm, redirecting his momentum while stepping into his space. The contact wasn't brutal, but firm enough to make him stumble backward, confusion replacing cocky confidence. Alex's phone captured everything from his position, but his filming angle shifted wildly as she moved. When he attempted to grab her free arm, probably thinking he could steady his shot while helping his friends, Elena demonstrated why individual sports had suited her better than team activities. A shoulder throw setup that stopped just short of completion, leaving him off balance and grasping air while she controlled his center of gravity with minimal effort. Tyler recovered from initial surprise with quick athlete reflexes, lunging forward with both hands reaching for her shoulders. This time, Elena didn't hold back. The hip toss that followed was textbook perfect. She stepped into his advance, positioned her hip correctly, and used his own forward momentum to send him in a controlled arc that ended with him flat on his back on the cafeteria floor. The entire sequence lasted perhaps 4 seconds. No blood, no broken bones, no dramatic choreography. Just 3 teenage boys sitting or lying on linoleum, staring up at a girl who looked as surprised as anyone by what had just happened. The cafeteria fell completely silent, not the dramatic hush of movies, but genuine, shocked quiet that follows when reality deviates sharply from expectation. Students held phones in frozen positions, mouths slightly open, trying to process what they'd witnessed. Even lunch staff paused mid-motion. Eleanor stood in the center of it all, laptop still clutched against her chest, breathing slightly elevated but posture controlled. Her face showed no triumph, no satisfaction at having physically dominated 3 larger opponents. Instead, she looked almost sad, as if this outcome was inevitable but unwanted. "I told you I just wanted to eat lunch in peace," she said quietly. But in the silence, her voice carried to every corner of the room. That's when the real chaos began. Alex's phone, which had been recording throughout, automatically uploaded the video to his social media due to a forgotten setting. Within seconds, the clip began circulating through Lincoln Valley's digital ecosystem. Students who witnessed it live started adding their own recordings from different angles, creating multi-perspective documentation of what the internet would eventually label cafeteria justice. But as the video spread and students began sharing experiences in comments, a pattern emerged. This wasn't Tyler's first time cornering a student in the cafeteria. It wasn't the second or third time either. Amy Rodriguez, a sophomore who'd transferred out last semester, saw the video on a friend's story and immediately shared screenshots of text conversations from months ago. They showed her describing almost identical harassment from Tyler and his friends, including photos of belongings accidentally destroyed during lunch period confrontations. David Kim, now a senior at Riverside High across town, recognized Tyler's voice in the audio and shared his own documentation from 2 years ago. Security footage he'd obtained through formal complaint showed Tyler systematically targeting him in hallways, bathrooms, and the cafeteria until his parents finally transferred him to avoid psychological damage. Within an hour, 8 different former Lincoln Valley students had come forward with documented evidence of similar harassment. The pattern was consistent. Tyler identified socially isolated students, began with seemingly friendly overtures that escalated into psychological pressure and physical intimidation, then retreated behind his family's social standing and school connections when consequences threatened. The digital avalanche reached Ms. Walsh's attention when a parent called demanding explanations for why their child was afraid to attend lunch periods. She watched the video with growing horror, not just at the physical confrontation, but at her own unwitting participation in what was clearly systematic harassment. Principal Johnson received 16 phone calls before 2 p.m. Parents who'd wondered why their children seemed anxious about school, counselors who'd noticed patterns but lacked evidence, and school board members who suddenly understood why transfer rates had been climbing over 3 years. By the time classes ended, Tyler found himself in the principal's office with his parents, facing a conference table full of administrators, lawyers, and very angry adults who'd spent the afternoon reviewing security footage and documented complaints that had been systematically ignored or explained away. "The video evidence is quite clear," Principal Johnson stated, his usually diplomatic tone replaced by barely controlled anger. This wasn't an isolated incident of teenage social dynamics. This represents a pattern of predatory behavior that this institution failed to address adequately. Tyler's father, Robert Cross, sat rigid in his chair, face the color of old newspaper. 3 hours ago, he'd been fielding congratulations about his son's leadership qualities. Now he was reviewing documentation that those leadership qualities were actually systematic cruelty enabled by institutional protection and family influence. "There must be some misunderstanding," Robert attempted, voice lacking its usual boardroom confidence. "Tyler has always been popular with his classmates." "Mr. Cross," interrupted Dr. Jennifer Martinez from the school district's legal department, "we have documented evidence spanning 3 years. Security footage, witness statements, medical records from students who required counseling services, and transfer documents citing harassment concerns." She slid a thick folder across the table. "Your son has been the common factor in 19 separate incidents involving student transfers or extended absences." The room fell silent, except for pages turning as Robert Cross reviewed evidence that his son's achievements were built on systematic cruelty enabled by institutional protection and family influence. Tyler himself hadn't spoken since being called to the office. The confident swagger that had defined his high school career had evaporated, replaced by hunched posture of someone finally facing consequences that money and connections couldn't deflect. "The university has been contacted," Principal Johnson continued, tone becoming more formal as he outlined administrative response. "Your athletic scholarship offer is being reviewed pending investigation outcome. Additionally, you're suspended from all school activities immediately: football, student council, graduation ceremony participation." Jake and Alex faced similar but lesser consequences. Both received suspensions and mandatory enrollment in anger management programs. Their parents, lacking the Cross family's social prominence, responded with swift punishment rather than denial, but consequences extended beyond individual punishment. The Cross family's reputation, built over decades of community involvement and charitable giving, suffered immediate and devastating damage. Robert's construction company began losing municipal contracts as city council members distanced themselves from the scandal. Their country club membership came under review. Social invitations stopped arriving. Within a week, Tyler's college acceptance was formally revoked. State University's admissions office, facing their own social media backlash for initially defending the scholarship offer, released a statement emphasizing their commitment to creating safe campus environments free from predatory behavior. The local newspaper picked up the story, framing it as investigation into systematic bullying in public schools and the role of family influence in enabling harmful behavior. The article quoted documentation that transformed this from a school disciplinary matter into potential legal proceedings. Tyler's parents hired a criminal defense attorney, not because they believed in their son's innocence, but because they understood their family's future depended on managing legal exposure. The attorney's first advice was immediate enrollment in residential treatment for adolescents with behavioral disorders, combined with community service and victim impact counseling. While Tyler's world collapsed, Elena's experience took an entirely different trajectory. The viral video, which could have made her a social outcast, instead transformed her into an unexpected symbol of standing up to systematic oppression. Students who'd been afraid to speak began approaching her with their own stories. 3 days after the cafeteria incident, Principal Johnson called Elena to his office. She entered expecting punishment for the physical confrontation, despite its clearly defensive nature. Instead, she found herself facing a very different conversation. "Miss Rodriguez," he began, "the events of this week have forced us to confront serious shortcomings in our approach to student welfare and conflict resolution. We've failed students who needed protection, and we've enabled behavior that should have been stopped years ago." Eleanor shifted uncomfortably, unsure where this was leading. "The school board has approved funding for a new peer support program," he continued, "and we'd like you to consider serving as its founding coordinator. Based on response to recent events, there are clearly students who need resources for dealing with harassment, conflict resolution, and personal safety." The offer surprised her more than anything that had happened in the cafeteria. "I'm not sure I'm qualified for something like that," she replied honestly. "I just defended myself. That doesn't make me an expert on helping others." "Actually," Dr. Johnson said, pulling out a folder, "your background suggests otherwise. Your martial arts training included conflict de-escalation and self-defense instruction for younger students. Your academic record shows consistent volunteer work with anti-bullying organizations. And your response to this situation demonstrates exactly the kind of measured judgment we need in a peer leader." The program he described would involve training sessions for students who wanted to learn basic self-defense, conflict resolution workshops, and peer counseling support for harassment victims. It would be entirely voluntary, student-led, and focused on empowerment rather than retaliation. "The goal isn't to create vigilantes," he emphasized. "It's to give students tools for protecting themselves and supporting each other when institutional responses fall short. What happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone, but when it does, students should have resources beyond hoping adults will intervene effectively." Elena considered the proposal while watching students pass by office windows. Some moved with easy assurance of social acceptance. Others hurried with downcast eyes, carrying themselves like prey animals, hoping to avoid predator attention. "Would there be training requirements?" she asked. "Supervision? Clear guidelines about what we can and can't do?" "Absolutely," Dr. Johnson confirmed. "Professional oversight, established protocols, legal boundaries clearly defined. This would be legitimate educational programming, not unstructured peer intervention." After several days of consideration, Eleanor agreed to pilot the program. The first meeting took place in the school library after hours, with 12 students in attendance. Some were obvious targets of social aggression. Others were bystanders wanting tools for supporting friends, and a few were former participants in Tyler's harassment-seeking ways to make amends. Initial sessions focused on basic self-defense concepts, situational awareness, de-escalation techniques, and physical responses that prioritized escape over engagement. Elena emphasized that martial arts training wasn't about fighting, but understanding how to protect yourself when other options were exhausted. The goal is never to hurt someone, she explained during the third meeting, demonstrating a wrist release technique with a volunteer. The goal is to create enough space and time to get to safety. Everything we learn here is about protection, not retaliation. Lisa Park, a sophomore who'd been targeted by Jake's group before their suspension, raised her hand. But what if they come back? What if they decide to get revenge? It was a legitimate concern Elena had considered extensively. That's why we also work on conflict prevention and institutional support, she replied. Physical techniques are last resort when everything else has failed. Most situations can be de-escalated or avoided entirely with the right approach. The program expanded organically as word spread. Students began approaching Elena in hallways to share experiences or ask for advice. Teachers started referring students who seemed isolated or anxious. Parents called requesting information about the peer support initiative. Within a month, the program had 35 regular participants and a waiting list for advanced workshops. The school district began developing policies to implement similar programs across all high schools in the system. Educational consultants visited to document the model for potential statewide adoption. But the most meaningful change occurred in Lincoln Valley's daily social dynamics. Students who previously suffered harassment in silence now had resources and support networks. Bystanders who once felt helpless when witnessing aggression now had specific tools for intervening safely. The culture of institutional indifference that had enabled systematic bullying began shifting toward active protection of vulnerable students. Elena found herself in an ironic position. The girl who'd wanted to remain invisible had become a visible symbol of standing up for those who couldn't protect themselves. But unlike Tyler's previous dominance through fear and intimidation, her influence came from empowerment and education. 6 months later, she stood before a packed auditorium addressing the school district's annual safety conference. Parents, administrators, and students from across the region had come to learn about peer support programming and student-led conflict resolution. Self-defense isn't about becoming aggressive, she told the audience, voice carrying clearly through the microphone system. It's about understanding your own power and using it responsibly. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their learning environment, and sometimes that safety comes from teaching people to protect themselves and each other. In the audience, she spotted several familiar faces. Dr. Johnson nodded approvingly from the front row. Miss Walsh, who'd become a strong advocate for the program after confronting her own role in enabling harassment, sat with other teachers implementing similar initiatives in their schools. Near the back, she noticed a figure she didn't immediately recognize. A young man in his early 20s wearing a community college sweatshirt, watching the presentation with intense focus. Only when he removed his baseball cap did she realize it was Tyler Cross. He looked different, thinner, less confident, carrying himself with careful posture of someone who'd learned difficult lessons about consequences and responsibility. When their eyes met across the auditorium, he didn't look away or show anger. Instead, he nodded slightly, a gesture that might be acknowledgement or even respect. After the presentation, as audience members filed out discussing implementation strategies and funding requirements, Tyler approached the stage. Elena tensed instinctively, muscle memory preparing for conflict, but his body language suggested no threat. "I wanted to apologize," he said quietly, voice barely audible over the departing crowd. "For what I did. For the pattern of behavior. For all of it. I know an apology doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it." Elena studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. Instead, she saw exhaustion and genuine remorse. "What happened to you?" "Therapy," he replied simply. "Lots of therapy. Community service with victims of bullying, anger management, learning that the person I thought I was wasn't who I actually was." He paused, gathering courage for what came next. I'm starting community college in the fall, working towards social work certification, trying to find ways to help instead of hurt. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it represented something unprecedented in both their experiences. Accountability without destruction, consequences that led to growth rather than merely punishment. As Tyler walked away, Elena reflected on the strange journey that brought her from a quiet corner table in the cafeteria to this auditorium stage. She'd never wanted to be a leader or symbol, but sometimes circumstances choose roles for people rather than people choosing roles for themselves. The transformation wasn't complete or perfect. Bullying didn't disappear from Lincoln Valley High overnight, and social hierarchies didn't dissolve into utopian equality. But something fundamental had shifted in how the school community responded to harassment and supported vulnerable students. When new situations arose, and they inevitably did, the response was different. Students who witnessed intimidation had tools for intervention. Victims had support networks and resources for protection. Adults had better training for recognizing and addressing systematic harassment. The peer support program became a model replicated across the state, proving that student-led initiatives could create meaningful change in school culture. But for Elena, the greatest victory remained simple. No student sat alone and defenseless anymore. The isolation she'd experienced had been transformed into a network that protected others from facing the same. In the end, the girl who just wanted to eat lunch in peace had created something far more valuable. A community where peace was possible for everyone.